potential suspects.
In the autumn of 1988, the Toronto police called in FBI profiler Greg McCreary to assist in the search for the Scarborough rapist. Over the next several months, McCreary analysed police reports and was able to link 4 more attacks to the Scarborough rapist, bringing the total up to 11.
This was a very dangerous subtype of rapist that was very anger-based, perhaps even sadistic in nature. They're rare, but they're very, very dangerous offenders.
McCreary's concerns grew as the assaults became more serious.
Not only were these women being brutalized, but we felt we're on the verge of perhaps this thing moving over the line into homicide, and that's what had everybody's attention.
When one sees a serial rapist, there is a high probability that they're being driven by a sexual drive that's been misdirected, and that they are going to continue to be driven in that fashion unless we intervene through catching them.
Special Agent McCreary developed a profile of the person he thought police should be looking for.
We felt this was more of a high-functioning, intelligent, psychopathic, sexually sadistic sort of offender. And he lives in the Scarborough area in a dependent situation, probably with family members. Early 20s, has a violent relationship with women, even women that he's in a relationship with.
When Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka first met in the autumn of 1987, there had already been 3 attacks linked to the Scarborough rapist. Carla never suspected the man she was falling in love with was linked to these brutal crimes.
I want to go there and say, look, is this correct?
At first, Paul Bernardo showered her with flowers, with gifts, and treated her really well. He was a considerate person. He was a considerate lover. He was a nice guy. And she flaunted him something fierce.
Paul and Carla's relationship quickly intensified, both physically and emotionally. Over the next 18 months, Paul drove to St. Catharines to visit Carla several times a week, an 80-mile trip. Our family adored him and weren't concerned by their 6-year age difference. Like 19-year-old Carla, her parents thought Paul was a great catch. In the spring of 1989, Carla graduated from high school. By autumn that year, Carla was telling friends that Paul had been verbally abusing her, but she was always quick to forgive him. That December, Paul and Carla took a romantic trip to Niagara Falls. There he asked her to marry him. She eagerly accepted. To her parents, he seemed like an excellent choice of husband.
He was good looking, he had ambitions to be a rap singer. He'd been trained as an accountant, had a degree from the University of Toronto. Certainly he had all the credentials to be a dream son-in-law.
They planned to marry in the spring of 1991. On the 29th of May 1990, police released a composite sketch of the Scarborough rapist to the media.
The composite sketch came out about the time we were doing the profile. One of the victims got a pretty good look.
When the sketch was publicized, friends of Paul Bernardo were stunned by what they saw.
Paul Bernardo's best friends had in fact contacted Toronto Police and said, this artist's concept is a ringer for Paul Bernardo.
During the summer of 1990, a serial rapist was terrorizing the Toronto suburb of Scarborough. Police released a composite sketch of the suspect. Metropolitan Toronto police stations were flooded with calls. The man accused of more than a dozen sexual assaults in the Scarborough area bore a strong resemblance to Paul Bernardo. By November 1990, several people, including Bernardo's own friends, had given his name to the police after seeing the composite sketch. The police brought him in for questioning and requested a DNA sample. The sample was sent to the Centre of Forensic Sciences in Toronto, where it was put on a shelf with hundreds of other samples awaiting testing.
Keep in mind that DNA still, even at that time, was relatively new. It isn't what it is today. There's all sorts of different technology today that we can get DNA readings very, very quickly.
Around the time Paul was questioned by the police, he moved from Scarborough to St. Catharines. He and his fiancée, Carla Homolka, lived with her parents until they could get a place of their own. The sexual assaults in Scarborough suddenly stopped, but a rash of incidents began to occur in the St. Catharines area. Carla and her family never suspected Paul. They adored him, especially Carla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy, who looked up to him like a big brother. But soon she became the target of his deviant urges.
Secretly, he wasn't just the brother that she'd never had. He was also, you know, ogling her and salivating over her, and she was the virgin that Carla wasn't.
Paul began to pressure Carla for the one thing she was unable to give him.
While Carla wasn't a virgin, the closest person to her who was a virgin was her youngest sister, Tammy.
Desperately wanting to please Paul, Carla agreed to drug her younger sister so Paul could have sex with her.
Part of her reasoning is that she'll give him Tammy's virginity in place of her own.
It would be Carla's Christmas present to her fiancé. The 23rd of December 1990, after the rest of the Homolka family had gone to bed, Paul and Carla invited Tammy to stay up and have a few cocktails. Tammy didn't know that her drinks had been laced with sleeping pills purchased by Carla.
She used an animal tranquilizer in order to keep her sedated, while the two of them participated in this rape.
Carla used another drug stolen from the veterinary clinic where she worked to keep her sister unconscious. She soaked a rag with the drug halothane and held it over her sister's face while Paul raped the young girl. They videotaped the entire episode. All this happened while the rest of the family slept upstairs.
Most people videotape their family holidays and their children's first, second, third, and so on birthday. But he liked to videotape, in his eyes, his sexual contrast.
Paul then ordered Carla to assault her own sister.
On videotape, Paul rapes her, and so does Carla, have sex with her own sister.
But the plan turned deadly. After Carla had raped her sister, Tammy began to vomit and choked. Paul and Carla quickly dressed her, hid the camera, and called an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, the couple said they tried to revive Tammy after she'd passed out from drinking. Tammy was taken to the hospital, where in the early hours of Christmas Eve, she was pronounced dead.
It never crossed anybody's mind that her own sister had participated in the killing.
Although doctors found a mysterious burn mark on Tammy's face where Carla had held the halothane-soaked drag, they concluded that she died of natural causes. Paul and Carla claimed the mark was a rug burn caused by their attempt to revive Tammy. Carla's parents viewed the death of the youngest child as a tragic accident, something that could happen to any teenager.
Everybody kind of took it at face value, so to speak, and wow, accidental death. Kids do drugs, kids drink. How unfortunate, how tragic.
A month later, Carla and Paul moved out of the Homolka house and into their own home. They moved into this two-story bungalow in Port Dalhousie, a small town near St. Catharines. From the outside, they appeared to be a perfect couple, but behind closed doors, Paul began to turn his aggression on Carla. He teased Carla that he was the Scarborough rapist and began physically abusing her. Any thoughts Carla had of leaving Paul were diminished by her insecurities and fear that he would tell her parents about her involvement in Tammy's death.
In this particular case, we have a man who is a serial rapist who meets up with a woman who ultimately ends up participating in further acts of sexual abuse, and ones that are even far more serious.
Paul Bernardo had given a DNA sample to the police more than 2 months earlier, but it still hadn't been tested.
Anytime offenders come into contact with the police and they don't end up in handcuffs, they're emboldened. They think they're better, smarter than the police.
The 15th of June, 1991. 2 weeks before Carla's dream wedding, Paul woke her in the middle of the night with a surprise. A young girl, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. He'd abducted Leslie from her own backyard, luring the teenager into his car with a cigarette. Together, the couple held the young girl captive in their home, repeatedly assaulting her and recording the attacks on video. After less than 24 hours, they strangled her, cut up her body, and encased the pieces in concrete blocks, before dumping them in nearby Lake Gibson. It was 2 weeks before their wedding.
Well, clearly the relationship between Paul and Carla was a very destructive one. These are two people that fed into one another and encouraged and supported one another, would appear, in doing things that were just, in some sense, unspeakable.
On the 29th of June, 1991, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka exchanged wedding vows before more than 100 friends and family members. On the same day as their fairy tale wedding, fishermen discovered the dismembered body of 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, encased in concrete blocks. The details of the young girl's murder sent shockwaves through the region.
It was gruesome. I mean, when you imagine not only who could kill a young teenage girl, but who could dismember her body and dispose of it in such an ugly and heinous way. There was this massive veil of fear right across southern Ontario.